I turned off the highway and onto the residential street, following the GPS directions toward my new place. The roads got narrower as I drove deeper into the neighborhood, trees crowding closer to the pavement. My car bumped along the final stretch of road before I spotted the small ranch house sitting back from the street. I pulled into the gravel driveway, the stones crunching under my tires. The sound seemed extra loud in the quiet afternoon. The house looked smaller than it had in the listing photos, a modest single story with faded blue siding and white trim that needed a fresh coat of paint. The front yard was mostly brown patches with tufts of overgrown grass. 8 months without anyone living here had taken its toll. I shut off the engine and sat for a minute, taking it all in. This was home now. After 10 years in California, Bend, Oregon would be my fresh start. The real estate agent had called it a charming fixer-upper with character. That was one way to put it. I grabbed my backpack from the passenger seat and fished the house key from the front pocket. The air was crisp when I stepped out of the car, carrying the scent of pine from the woods behind the property. I walked up to the front door, my footsteps loud on the wooden porch. The boards creaked under my weight. The key stuck a little in the lock before turning. The door swung open with a low groan from the hinges. I stepped inside, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. The living room was empty except for a dusty ceiling light fixture and blinds hanging crooked on the windows. "Well, here we are," I said to myself, my voice bouncing off the bare walls. I made a few trips back and forth to the car, bringing in my suitcases, boxes, and the few pieces of furniture I'd brought with me. By the time I finished, sweat beaded on my forehead despite the cool weather. I flopped down on my couch, now sitting awkwardly in the middle of the living room, and caught my breath. Once I had the energy, I decided to check out the rest of the house. The living room connected to a small dining area, which led to the kitchen. The kitchen had old appliances, but the listing had said they all worked. Yellow-tinted linoleum covered the floor, curling slightly at the edges. I opened the fridge, empty and clean at least. The freezer had a slight smell of freezer burn, but nothing too bad. I moved on to the cabinets, opening each one to see what I was working with. Most were empty, though I found a few abandoned spice jars in one. When I opened the cabinet above the stove, I noticed something odd. A piece of paper was taped to the back wall. I reached in and pulled it free, the tape making a ripping sound as it came loose. The paper was folded in half. I opened it and found a handwritten note. House rules. 1. Close and lock the front door at exactly 12:04 a.m. every night. 2. Never answer when a girl knocks on Fridays at 7:30 p.m. 3. If you hear footsteps on the roof after 1 a.m., stay in bed with your eyes closed. 4. Do not look out any windows between 1:12 and 1:18 a.m. 5. If you find a black cat inside the house, feed it and let it out before midnight. I read through the list twice, then snorted. What the hell? The handwriting was messy but readable, like someone had written it in a hurry. It had to be some kind of joke from the previous tenant. Maybe they were trying to freak out whoever moved in next. Good one, I muttered, crumpling the paper and tossing it into the trash can under the sink. I continued exploring the house, finding 2 bedrooms and a bathroom down the hallway. The master bedroom had an attached half bath that needed a good scrubbing. The shower in the main bathroom had water stains, and the mirror was spotted with age. After checking out the whole place, I went back to the living room and started unpacking the essentials. I made up my bed first, always the priority when moving, then set up the TV and unpacked my clothes. By early evening, I was worn out. The drive from California had taken 2 days, and I'd been up since 6 that morning to get an early start on the final leg. My muscles ached from carrying boxes and furniture. The thought of cooking dinner seemed like too much effort. I found my phone and ordered a pizza from a place that came up on a quick search. The guy who answered said it would be about 45 minutes. I thanked him and hung up. While waiting for the food, I sat on the couch and looked around at my new home. The walls were bare, Boxes were stacked everywhere, and the place had that empty feeling that comes with a new move. But it was mine, or at least the bank's, for the next 30 years. The mortgage payments would be half what I'd been paying for rent in San Francisco. The pizza arrived right on time. I tipped the delivery guy and took the box to the kitchen. I didn't have a table set up yet, so I ate standing at the counter, looking out the small window at the backyard. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the patchy grass. That weird list of rules popped back into my mind as I chewed. Who would come up with something like that? The specificity was what made it strange. Exactly 12:04 a.m., precisely 7:30 p.m. on Fridays, the very specific window of time between 1:12 and 1:18 a.m. It was oddly detailed for a prank. I shrugged it off. Some people had weird senses of humor. Maybe the previous tenant had watched too many horror movies. After finishing 3 slices, I put the rest in the fridge for tomorrow's breakfast. A moving tradition. I washed my hands and face in the bathroom sink, then changed into a t-shirt and sweatpants. The day's exhaustion hit me all at once. My eyelids felt heavy and my limbs were like lead. I checked the time on my phone. Not even 9 o'clock yet, but my body was done for the day. I turned off the lights and made sure the front door was locked before heading to my bedroom. The house creaked and settled around me as I crawled under the covers. The mattress felt good after 2 nights in motel beds. As I drifted off to sleep, I had a fleeting thought about those strange rules. Close the door at 12:04 a.m. Don't answer on Fridays at 7:30. Don't look out windows at 1:12 a.m. Feed a black cat. Ridiculous. I turned over and pulled the blanket higher. Tomorrow I'd start properly unpacking and making this place feel like home. Tonight, I just needed sleep. My breathing slowed as I fell into a deep slumber, completely unaware of what my casual dismissal of those rules might bring. I woke up with a jolt at exactly 12:04 in the morning. My eyes snapped open to the unmistakable sound of my front door opening, the creak of hinges, the soft whoosh of air as it swung inward. I lay completely still in bed, heart thumping against my ribs. The house fell silent again. Too silent. I strained to hear footsteps, voices, anything that might explain what I'd just heard. Nothing came. Just the hollow quiet of the empty house pressing against my eardrums. "Hello?" I called out weakly, immediately regretting it. No response. I sat up slowly, swinging my legs over the side of the bed. The hardwood floor felt cold against my bare feet as I stood up. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand, turning on its flashlight function. The beam cut through the darkness of my bedroom, casting long shadows across the walls. I crept down the hallway, moving as quietly as possible. Each floorboard seemed to groan under my weight, impossibly loud in the stillness. The living room appeared empty when I reached it, shadows dancing across the half-unpacked boxes as I swept my light across the space. And there it was, the front door standing wide open, a rectangle of night framed by my doorway. The porch light I'd left on cast a yellow glow that barely reached the first few steps. Beyond that, just darkness. I moved cautiously to the threshold, poking my head out to look around. The street was deserted. No cars passing, no people walking, just the quiet neighborhood sleeping under a canopy of stars. "What the hell?" I muttered, pulling back inside. I pushed the door closed firmly, turned the lock, and then checked the deadbolt twice to make sure it was secure. I tugged on the handle to confirm it was properly latched. I must not have locked it right, I told myself, running a hand through my hair. That's all. Just didn't close it properly. But I remembered locking it before bed. I always locked my doors, a habit from living in California. And even if I'd forgotten the deadbolt, how had the door swung open on its own? I walked back to my bedroom, checking the windows along the way, all closed and locked. I climbed back into bed, pulling the covers up to my chin like a kid afraid of monsters. Sleep didn't come easily. I kept hearing every creak and groan of the house settling, each one jerking me back to alertness. When morning came, I almost convinced myself I'd dreamed the whole thing. Almost. The next night, I decided to stay awake. I sat in the living room with all the lights on, a mug of coffee on the side table next to me, and my eyes fixed on the front door. I'd checked and rechecked the locks at least 5 times. The door was definitely secured. I glanced at my phone. 11:55. Just a few more minutes. I took a sip of coffee, grimacing at the bitter taste. My eyes felt heavy despite the caffeine. Moving to a new place was exhausting, and I'd spent most of the day unpacking boxes and arranging furniture. But I forced myself to stay alert, watching the minutes tick by on my phone screen. 11:59. Midnight. 12:01. I leaned forward, elbows on knees, staring intently at the door. 12:02. 12:03. My phone screen changed to 12:04, and at that exact moment, I heard it. A soft click from the direction of the door. My eyes widened as I watched the deadbolt turn on its own, sliding back into the unlocked position with a distinct thunk. Then the door handle turned, and the door swung open slowly, as if pushed by an invisible hand. Cool night air rushed in. The door stood fully open now, revealing the empty porch beyond. I couldn't move. My coffee mug slipped from my fingers and crashed to the floor, spilling across the hardwood. I barely noticed. "This isn't happening," I whispered, but it was. I'd seen it with my own eyes. The door had unlocked and opened itself at exactly 12:04. I remembered the crumpled paper in my kitchen trash, the house rules I'd dismissed as a joke. Lock front door at exactly 12:04 a.m. nightly. Was that what it meant? Not that I needed to lock the door at that time, but that the door would unlock itself if I didn't actively lock it at exactly that moment. I got up on shaky legs and walked to the door. I pushed it closed and locked it again, my hands trembling slightly. Then I went to the kitchen, dug through the trash, and retrieved the crumpled rules list. I smoothed it out on the counter, reading through each item again. Maybe this wasn't a joke after all. The next morning, I decided I needed to meet my neighbors. If anyone knew about the strange things happening in my house, it would be someone who'd lived nearby for a while. I spotted an older man working in his front yard across the street. He was raking leaves into neat piles, wearing a flannel shirt despite the warm weather. I walked over, trying to appear casual. "Morning," I called out as I approached. He looked up, pushing his glasses higher on his nose. "Morning," he replied with a friendly nod. "You must be the new guy who moved into the Burton place." "Yeah, that's me. Sammy Fig." I extended my hand. He set his rake against a tree and shook my hand firmly. "Hayden Williams. Lived here going on 20 years now." "Nice to meet you. It seems like a quiet neighborhood." "Usually is." Hayden picked up his rake again, resuming his work. "How are you settling in?" "Pretty good. Still unpacking." I hesitated, then decided to dive in. "You mentioned the Burton place. Was Burton the last person who lived there?" Hayden's raking slowed. "Dennis Burton, young guy, worked from home doing computer stuff." He looked up at me, his expression careful. "Left in a hurry about 8 months ago." "Left in a hurry." Mm-hmm. Hayden gathered a small pile of leaves. Started acting strange after a few months. Kept odd hours. Put up cameras all over the place. Then one day he was just gone. Left everything behind. Furniture, clothes, even his car in the garage. Real estate company finally cleared it all out a couple months back. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. Did he say why he was leaving? Hayden stopped raking altogether now, leaning on the handle. Said the house was getting to him. Started talking about rules he had to follow. Thought someone was coming into his house at night. He shook his head. Poor guy got more and more paranoid. I tried to check on him when I could, but he stopped answering his door those last few weeks. My mouth felt dry. Do you know where he went? No idea. Police did a wellness check when his mail started piling up, but they couldn't find him. No family came looking either. Hayden studied my face. House has a bit of a reputation now, I'm afraid. That's probably why you got such a good deal on it. Yeah, probably, I managed to say. Hayden seemed to notice my discomfort. Old houses make noises, pipes, settling foundation, that sort of thing. Dennis was working too much, sleeping too little, started seeing things that weren't there. He gave me a reassuring smile. I'm sure you'll be fine. Right, I said, not believing it for a second. Thanks for the information. I should get back to unpacking. Sure thing. Let me know if you need anything. I'm usually around. I nodded and walked back to my house, feeling Hayden's eyes on my back the whole way. Friday evening came, and I found myself thinking about the third rule on the list: never answer girl knocking Fridays 7:30 p.m. I'd been following the first rule religiously since discovering what happened when I didn't. Each night at exactly 12:04, I would lock the front door, holding the deadbolt in place as I felt something trying to turn it from the other side. Whatever force opened my door seemed to get stronger each night, but as long as I kept my hand on the lock until 12:05, the door stayed closed. Now I sat in my living room at 7:25 on Friday evening, waiting to see if the third rule would prove as real as the first. 7:28. 7:29. At exactly 7:30, 3 soft knocks sounded on my front door. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I hadn't fully believed it would happen. The knocks came again, slightly louder this time. I moved to the window and carefully peered through a gap in the blinds. A young girl stood on my porch, maybe 9 or 10 years old. She wore a plain white dress that seemed too thin for the evening chill. Her dark hair hung in neat braids on either side of her face, and her smile. God, her smile was all wrong. Too wide, too many teeth, stretching her face in a way that made my skin crawl. She knocked again, 3 precise taps. I know you're in there, she called out in a sing-song voice that made the hair on my arms stand up. Won't you please let me in? I'm so cold out here. I backed away from the window, bumping into the coffee table. Please, she called again, her voice somehow both childlike and ancient. I just want to come inside for a little while. Don't you want to be friends? I shook my head even though she couldn't see me. No, I definitely did not want to be friends. The knocking became more insistent. It's not polite to ignore guests, she said, her voice taking on an edge. Please open the door. I promise I'll be good. Minutes ticked by. I sat on my couch, hands pressed over my ears, trying to block out her increasingly desperate pleas. You have to let me in, she cried, her voice cracking. Please, I'm so hungry. The last word made my blood run cold. Hungry. Not cold, not lonely. Hungry. The knocking turned to pounding, the whole door shaking in its frame. I grabbed my phone, ready to call the police, but stopped myself. What would I say? There's a little girl at my door who I think might not be human. After what felt like hours, but was probably about 20 minutes, the pounding stopped abruptly. Silence fell over the house. I waited 5 more minutes before cautiously approaching the window again. The porch was empty. The girl was gone. I sank down onto the floor, my back against the wall, trying to process what had just happened. The rules were real. All of them, probably. And I had a feeling that breaking any of them would be a terrible mistake. I pulled out the crumpled paper from my pocket, reading through the remaining rules with new respect and fear. Stay in bed eyes closed if hearing roof footsteps after 1 a.m. Avoid looking out windows between 1:12 and 1:18 a.m. Feed and release any black cat found inside before midnight. I didn't know what would happen if I broke these rules, and I had no desire to find out. Whatever was happening in this house, whatever had driven Dennis Burton to flee in the middle of the night, leaving everything behind, it was real. And now it was my problem too. I woke up to darkness. The digital clock on my nightstand showed 1:15 in the morning, its red numbers the only light in the room. At first, I thought the sound had been part of a dream, a dull thud from somewhere above me. Then I heard it again, a footstep on my roof. My whole body went rigid. The third rule flashed through my mind. Stay in bed with eyes closed if hearing footsteps on the roof after 1. Another step landed directly above my head, slow and deliberate. Whatever was up there had weight to it. This wasn't a squirrel or a raccoon. The ceiling creaked under the pressure. I pulled the blanket up to my chin, heart hammering in my chest. The footsteps continued, moving from one end of the roof to the other with a measured pace. Thud, pause. Thud, pause. Like whoever or whatever was up there wanted me to hear each step. "It's nothing," I whispered to myself. "Just the house settling." But houses don't settle in rhythmic footsteps that cross back and forth overhead. I squeezed my eyes shut as the steps moved to the area above my bedroom window. They stopped there. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. I wanted to look. Every instinct screamed at me to get up, grab my phone, and call someone. Anyone. Instead, I pulled the blanket over my head and kept my eyes firmly closed, just as the rules instructed. My breath came fast and shallow under the covers, making the space hot and stuffy. But I didn't dare move. The footsteps started again, this time moving toward the edge of the roof above my window. I heard a scraping sound like something dragging itself to the edge. My entire body tensed, waiting for whatever might come next. Nothing happened. The steps resumed their path across the roof, back and forth, for what felt like hours. I lay there, eyes shut tight, listening to the slow, methodical movement above me. Sometimes the steps would pause, as if whatever made them was listening for me. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep despite my terror, because when I opened my eyes again, sunlight streamed through my window and birds chirped outside. The clock read 7:30. The footsteps had stopped. I spent Monday in a fog, exhausted from the previous night and dreading what might come next. I'd experienced 2 of the 5 rules being tested now. The front door that unlocked itself at 12:04, the girl who knocked at 7:30 on Friday evenings, and now the footsteps on the roof. That left 2 more. Don't look out windows between 1:12 and 1:18 and feed any black cat found inside. Work was a blur. I came home, made dinner, and tried to distract myself with TV. But as the night wore on, I grew increasingly anxious. At midnight, I held the deadbolt in place as the lock tried to turn on its own. After that, I went to bed but couldn't sleep. When my phone showed 1:12, I heard it, a soft scratching at my bedroom window, like fingernails dragging across the glass. I froze, staring at the ceiling. The scratching grew more insistent, joined by something new, whispers. Too quiet to make out words, but definitely voices. Multiple voices. "Don't look," I reminded myself. "Just don't look." The scratching intensified, becoming more frantic, more desperate. The whispers grew louder, though still unintelligible. It sounded like several people talking over each other, urgent and insistent. I kept my eyes locked on the ceiling, counting the seconds. The voices took on a pleading quality, as if begging me to look their way. The scratching became violent enough that I worried the glass might crack. My hands gripped the sheets so tightly my knuckles hurt. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything but lie there listening to those sounds. But I remembered the rules. I remembered what my neighbor had told me about Dennis Burton. At exactly 1:18, everything stopped. The scratching, the whispers, gone in an instant. The sudden silence felt almost as unnerving as the sounds had been. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. The next few days passed without incident. I started developing a system, setting alarms on my phone for the critical times mentioned in the rules. 12:04 for the door, Fridays at 7:30 to avoid answering, 1 a.m. as a reminder to stay in bed if I heard roof footsteps, 1:12 to 1:18 to avoid looking out windows. 2 weeks after the window scratching incident, I came home from grocery shopping, arms loaded with bags. I kicked the door shut behind me and headed for the kitchen. As I rounded the corner, I nearly dropped everything. A black cat sat on my kitchen counter, calmly watching me. It was sleek and entirely black, not a single white patch anywhere on its coat. Its yellow eyes followed me as I set the groceries down. "How did you get in here?" I asked, my voice shaky. The cat just stared. I checked all the doors and windows. Everything was locked, just as I'd left it. There was no way the cat could have gotten inside. And yet, here it was. Rule 5. Feed and release any black cat found inside before midnight. I looked at the clock on the microwave, 8:20 in the evening. I had time, but the rule's implication was clear. If I didn't get the cat out before midnight, something bad would happen. I put away the groceries, trying to ignore how the cat's eyes tracked my every movement. When I finished, I opened a can of tuna I'd bought and put it on a small plate. "Here you go," I said, placing it on the floor. The cat jumped down gracefully and began to eat. I watched it, wondering what would happen if I just put it outside right now. But the rules were specific: feed and release. I had to do both. After the cat finished eating, it groomed itself thoroughly, then wandered around my house like it owned the place. I followed it nervously, waiting for it to decide it was ready to leave. As the hours ticked by, I grew more anxious. 11:30 came, and the cat showed no interest in the door I held open. "Come on," I pleaded. "You need to go." At 11:45, the cat suddenly stood up from where it had been lounging on my couch, stretched, and walked directly to the front door. I opened it, and the cat slipped out into the night without looking back. I closed and locked the door, leaning against it with relief. 4 rules tested. 4 rules followed. I was learning the rhythm of this house, the pattern of its strange demands. Over the next few weeks, I settled into a routine. The front door opened every night at 12:04, and I was always there to close and lock it immediately. The girl appeared every Friday at 7:30, sometimes alone, sometimes with other children whose faces I couldn't quite make out through the peephole. Their voices would blend together as they called to me, asking to be let in, growing increasingly insistent until they finally left. The footsteps on the roof came sporadically. I never knew which nights they would appear. But when they did, I stayed in bed with my eyes closed until they stopped. The window scratching at 1:12 became more violent each time. The whispers grew louder, more distinct, though I still couldn't make out what they were saying. Sometimes it sounded like they were arguing with each other about me. And occasionally, I'd come home to find the black cat waiting somewhere in the house. I always fed it and let it out before midnight. My life had become a careful dance around these rules. I never went out at night without making sure I'd be home well before 12:04. I made sure my phone was always charged so my alarms would work. I kept cans of tuna in the cupboard just in case the cat appeared. I was surviving, but just barely. Each night brought a new test, and the consequences of failure loomed over me like a shadow. The rules were keeping me alive, but they were also trapping me in a house that seemed to have plans of its own. I woke up early to a thin slice of morning light coming through the blinds. The past few weeks had been a blur of alarm clocks, midnight door checks, and hiding under covers. I'd gotten used to the routine of it all, but not the why. That was driving me crazy. I needed answers about this house. Real ones, not just the rules taped inside a kitchen cabinet. The local library opened at 9, according to their website. I showered quickly, threw on jeans and a flannel shirt, and headed out the door by 8:45. The drive took less than 10 minutes through quiet residential streets that looked completely normal in the daylight. It was hard to believe that just hours earlier I'd been lying in bed with my eyes squeezed shut while something walked back and forth on my roof. The Bend Public Library was a large, modern building with lots of windows and an open floor plan. Inside, the morning crowd was sparse. A few retirees reading newspapers, a young mom with a toddler in the children's section, and a woman with silver-white hair arranging books behind the information desk. I approached her, clearing my throat. "Excuse me, I was hoping to look into some local history." She looked up, adjusting her cat-eye glasses. "Local history? Anything specific you're looking for?" Her voice was soft but clear, like someone used to speaking in hushed tones. "I just moved into a house on Oakwood Drive, and I'm curious about its background." Something flickered across her face. Recognition, maybe concern, before she smiled. "I'm Amanda Marshall, head reference librarian. What's the address?" 42 Oakwood Drive." Her hands paused on the book she was holding. "I see, and you're living there now?" "Yeah, for about a month." She set the book down carefully. "Follow me to the local history section. We keep property records and newspaper archives there." I followed her through rows of shelves to a quiet corner of the library with several computers and filing cabinets. Amanda pulled out a chair at one of the terminals. "Let me show you how to access our digital archives. We have property records going back to the 1950s, and the local newspaper has been digitized for the past 30 years. She logged into the system, fingers moving quickly across the keyboard. "What's your name?" "Sammy. Sammy Fig." "Well, Sammy, I'll help you get started. The address search function is here." She pointed to a search field on the screen. "And newspaper searches can be done through this database." I sat down as she stepped back. "Thanks. I appreciate it. May I ask why you're interested in the house's history?" Her tone was casual, but her eyes were watching me carefully. I hesitated, not wanting to sound crazy. "Just curious. The previous owner left kind of suddenly." "Dennis Burton," she said, not as a question. "Yeah. Did you know him?" Amanda nodded slowly. "He came in here quite a bit toward the end. Researching the same things you are now, I imagine." That got my attention. What was he looking for exactly? "Previous residents, incidents." She paused. "Deaths." My stomach tightened. "Deaths? In my house?" I shouldn't say more. "The records will tell you what you need to know." She gestured to the computer. "Start with property transfers over the last decade. Then check the newspaper archives for the names and addresses you find." Before walking away, she added, "I'll be at the reference desk if you need anything else." I turned to the computer and typed in my address. The property records showed a series of owners, most staying only a year or two. Dennis Burton had owned it for 11 months before the bank reclaimed it. Before him, a Warren Ortega had owned the house for just over a year. Before that, Luna Castillo for 3 months. And before her, Eli Lucas for 14 months. These short ownership periods seemed strange. People usually stayed in houses for years, not months. I wrote down the names and dates, then switched to the newspaper database. I started with Warren Ortega, the most recent owner before Dennis. A search brought up a small article dated 2 years ago. "Local accountant found dead in front yard." The article was brief. Warren Ortega, 34, had been found dead on his front lawn early one morning by a neighbor walking their dog. No signs of trauma. No apparent cause of death. The medical examiner had ruled it a case of sudden cardiac arrest, though friends reported he had no known heart conditions. The date caught my eye. It was exactly 2 years ago today. I checked the time of discovery. 12:15 a.m. 12:15. Just minutes after the front door was supposed to unlock at 12:04. My hands felt cold as I typed in the next name, Luna Castillo. Her story appeared in a longer article. Young artist dies in sleep. Luna, 27, had been found in her bed when she failed to show up for work. The article mentioned she had moved to Bend to pursue her art career, buying the house on Oakwood Drive as her first home. Friends described her as vibrant and healthy, making her death all the more shocking. She'd been dead approximately 6 hours when found, putting her time of death around 1:15 a.m., right when the footsteps on the roof would happen. I felt sick, but kept going, searching for Eli Lucas. His death made the front page. Gruesome scene leaves. Police baffled. Eli Lucas, 41, had been found dead in his kitchen. His body was covered in deep claw marks, consistent with a large animal attack, according to the police report. However, all doors and windows had been locked from the inside. No animal was found in the house. The time of death was estimated between 1 u and 1:30 a.m., the window scratching time. I sat back, my heart pounding. 3 people, 3 deaths, each one matching a time when something happened in the house. The door opening at 12:04, the footsteps on the roof after 1:00 a.m., the window scratching between 1:12 and 1:18, and Dennis Burton, the one who'd left the rules, was the only one who'd gotten out alive. I printed the articles and walked back to the reference desk where Amanda was helping an elderly man find a book. When she finished, I approached. "Did you know about all these deaths when I told you my address?" She looked around to make sure no one was within earshot. "Yes." "Why didn't you say something? Would you have believed me?" Her eyes were kind but serious. "Most people don't, until they experience something themselves." I spread the articles on the counter. 3 deaths in the same house, all at specific times that match. Things that happened there. She nodded slowly. "Dennis Burton came to me after he found the first newspaper article. He was frantic, saying something was trying to get into his house every night." "Did he tell you about the rules?" I asked quietly. Amanda's eyes widened slightly. "You found them?" "In the kitchen cabinet. 5 rules about specific times and things not to do." "He made those rules," she said. "Dennis figured out the patterns. When people died, what they might have done wrong. He was trying to protect himself, and whoever came after him. But he left, disappeared." Amanda looked down at the articles. "He came in here the day before he vanished. Said he couldn't take it anymore. That following the rules was keeping him alive, but the house was changing him somehow. He said he had to get out." "And no one's seen him since?" "No, but he's the only one who got away." She gathered the articles and handed them back to me. Dennis was smart. He recognized the danger and found a way to manage it until he could escape. "But why does this happen? What is it about that house?" She sighed. "That's what Dennis was trying to figure out too. He went back further, looking at owners from decades ago. The pattern goes way back. Short ownership periods, unexplained deaths, disappearances." "Did he find anything? A cause?" "Nothing definitive. There were rumors about the land before the houses were built. Old stories about settlers who went missing. Native American warnings about the area." She shrugged. "But nothing concrete. Nothing that explains what's happening." I folded the articles and put them in my pocket. "Thank you for your help." "Sammy," she said as I turned to leave, "be careful. If you're seeing the same things Dennis did, those rules might be the only thing keeping you safe." I nodded. "I know. I'm following them, every night." "Good," she hesitated. "And if you need anything else, I'm here Tuesday through Saturday." On the drive home, my mind raced. 3 people had died in my house, each death connected to one of the rules. Warren had probably gone outside when the door opened at 12:04. Luna might have heard the footsteps on the roof and looked. Eli could have checked the windows during the scratching time. And the other rules? The Friday night knocking and the black cat? I hadn't found deaths connected to those yet, but that didn't mean they weren't just as dangerous. When I got home, the house looked ordinary in the afternoon light. No one would guess what happened here at night. I taped the articles to my refrigerator as a reminder of what was at stake. That evening, I checked all my alarms again, making sure they were set for the critical times. 12:04 a.m. for the door, 1 a.m. for potential roof footsteps, and 1:12 a.m. to avoid windows. I added an extra reminder for Friday at 7:30 p.m. Winter arrived with a cold snap that week. The first snow fell, light and powdery, covering the yard and roof. I watched through the kitchen window as darkness came earlier each day, giving the house more hours to do whatever it did at night. The supernatural activity grew stronger with the changing season. The scratching at the windows became violent, no longer just fingernails, but what sounded like claws or tools, scraping and digging at the glass. Some mornings I'd find tiny cracks in the corner of my bedroom window, as if something had nearly broken through. On Fridays, the knocking changed, too. What started as one girl had multiplied. Now I heard multiple children's voices, sometimes as many as a dozen, calling through the door with increasing desperation. "Please let us in. We're so cold out here. Don't you want to play with us? We know you're in there." Their little fists would pound all around the house at every door and window, the sound almost deafening at its peak before falling silent at exactly 8 p.m. The black cat appeared more frequently now, sometimes twice in a week. I kept a stock of tuna cans ready, having noticed a pattern. The cat always showed up before particularly active nights. It was like a warning system, preparing me for whatever would come after midnight. One night in early December, after letting the cat out just before midnight, I sat on my couch staring at the rules I'd rewritten and framed on my coffee table. No longer a joke, they were my lifeline. 1. Lock the front door at exactly 12:04 a.m. every night. 2. Never answer the girl knocking on Fridays at 7:30 p.m. 3. If you hear footsteps on the roof after 1 a.m., stay in bed with your eyes closed. 4. Do not look out any windows between 1:12 and 1:18 a.m. 5. Feed and release any black cat found inside before midnight. I understood now that my life depended on following these rules exactly. Dennis Burton had figured this out and escaped. Warren, Luna, and Eli hadn't been so lucky. As the clock ticked toward another night of alarms and vigilance, I wondered how long I could keep this up. Dennis had lasted 11 months before he had to run. I was only in month 2, and already the house's attempts to break through were getting stronger. My phone alarm buzzed, 12:03 a.m. Time to go to the door. I walked to the entrance and put my hand on the deadbolt, waiting. At exactly 12:04, I felt it turn beneath my fingers, fighting against my grip as I held it locked. The handle rattled violently, the door shuddering in its frame as something pushed from the other side. "Not tonight," I whispered. "Not any night." The pressure eventually subsided, and I went back to the couch to wait for the next alarm. This was my life now. A series of alarms, rules, and nighttime battles against whatever wanted in. I just had to be smarter than the house. I had to survive. I fell asleep on the couch. That was my first mistake. The second was forgetting to set my phone alarm. After pulling a double shift at the hardware store, I'd crashed hard watching some home renovation show with the volume turned low. My body felt like concrete, and my eyes kept slipping shut despite my best efforts. Just a quick rest, I told myself. I'd wake up before midnight, plenty of time to handle the door. I jolted awake to the sound of the heating system clicking off. The TV was still on, casting blue light across the darkened living room. I blinked at the clock on the cable box. 2:30 in the morning. My stomach dropped as I sat up, suddenly wide awake. The front door. I hadn't locked it at 12:04. "No, no, no," I whispered, scrambling to my feet. From my position on the couch, I could see straight down the hallway to the front entryway. The door stood open about 6 inches, a slice of night visible through the gap. I froze, listening. The house felt different, not empty. "Hello?" I called, immediately regretting it. Stupid. If something had come in, I just announced myself. No response came except the faint whistle of wind through the open door. I grabbed my phone from the coffee table and turned on its flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness as I moved cautiously toward the entryway, heart hammering in my chest. The door wasn't just ajar. It was standing fully open now, as if pushed wider by the wind, but there was no wind tonight. The porch light cast a yellow glow that stopped abruptly at the threshold, unable to penetrate the darkness inside. I swept my phone's light down to the floor and stopped breathing. Muddy footprints marked the hardwood. They started at the threshold and led inside, wet, dark impressions that couldn't have been there when I fell asleep. They weren't my boots. These prints were smaller, narrower, with a strange, elongated heel. I followed the trail with my light. The footprints moved from the door, across the entryway, and down the hallway toward my bedroom. My mouth went dry. Every instinct screamed to run outside, get in my car and drive away. But I couldn't leave without knowing what had come into my house. What might still be here. I stepped carefully beside the footprints, keeping my back to the wall as I moved down the hallway. The prints remained perfectly clear, mud still wet enough to glisten in my flashlight beam. They led straight to my bedroom door, which stood half open. I hadn't left it that way. "Is someone in there?" I called, my voice cracking. Again, silence answered. I pushed the door open with my foot, keeping my distance as I shined the light inside. My bedroom looked wrong. The covers on my bed were pulled back, neatly folded to one side as if someone had prepared it for sleeping. The pillow had a deep indentation in the center, like a head had been resting there recently. But what made my skin crawl was the continuation of those muddy footprints. They walked to the side of the bed and then disappeared. Not faded, not smudged, simply ended, as if whatever made them had climbed onto my bed and then ceased to exist. I backed out of the room, nearly tripping over my own feet. I ran to the front door, slammed it shut, and locked both the handle and deadbolt. I checked the windows, all still locked, then grabbed a kitchen chair and wedged it under the front doorknob. I spent the rest of the night sitting on the couch with every light in the house blazing, jumping at every creak and groan of the old building. Morning came with painful slowness. As sunlight crept through the windows, I expected the footprints to be gone, some hallucination born of exhaustion and the house's usual weirdness. But they remained, now dried to a crusty brown trail across my floor. Something had come in while the door was open. Something had been in my bed. I made coffee with shaking hands, spilling grounds on the counter. The caffeine did nothing to clear the fog of fear and sleep deprivation. I kept seeing that indentation in my pillow, perfectly shaped like a head, but somehow wrong in proportion. This was my wake-up call. The rules weren't just superstitions or quirks of a strange house. They were survival mechanisms. Dennis Burton had figured that out. So had Warren Ortega, Luna Castillo, and Eli Lucas. But too late. I wasn't going to be the next name on that list. I grabbed my phone and punched in the number for Bend Moving and Storage that I'd looked up weeks ago but never called. A woman answered on the third ring. "Bend Moving and Storage, this is Diane." "Hi, I need to schedule a move as soon as possible," I said, pacing around the kitchen. "Like, immediately soon." "All right, sir. We typically need at least a week's notice for—" "I'll pay extra, whatever it costs. I need to be out of this house." There was a pause. "May I ask why the urgency?" I looked at the muddy footprints leading to my bedroom. "Water damage. The place isn't safe." "I see." She didn't sound convinced. "The earliest we could possibly do is Monday, and that's if we have a cancellation. I'll take it. Please, put me on the list." I gave her my information, agreeing to her emergency scheduling fee without even asking how much it was. Money didn't matter. Getting out alive did. After hanging up, I sat at the kitchen table and made a list of everything I needed to do. Pack essentials, forward mail, notify work, find a new place to live, anywhere but here. As I wrote "cancel utilities," a strange heaviness settled over me. The pen felt like it weighed 10 pounds. My thoughts grew muddy, unfocused. Why leave? This is your home now. You're safe as long as you follow the rules. I blinked, shaking my head to clear it. That wasn't my thought. It felt planted, like someone had whispered it directly into my mind. The house. The house was trying to keep me here. I stood up so quickly my chair toppled backward. "No," I said aloud to the empty kitchen. "I'm not staying. I'm not ending up like the others." The heaviness pressed down harder. My legs felt weak, my resolve wavering. For a moment, I couldn't remember why I wanted to leave. Hadn't I chosen this place? Wasn't it affordable? Convenient? With enormous effort, I walked to the refrigerator where I'd taped the newspaper articles about the previous tenants' deaths. I forced myself to read each one again. Warren Ortega, dead on his lawn at 12:15. Luna Castillo, found in bed after the roof footsteps. Eli Lucas, clawed to death in his kitchen. The fog lifted slightly. This was real. This was happening. The house wanted me to stay, but not because it cared about me. It wanted me for something else. I grabbed a garbage bag and headed to my bedroom, carefully stepping over the muddy footprints. I started throwing clothes inside, not bothering to fold anything. Just the essentials, enough to get by until I could replace the rest. As I packed, the resistance grew stronger. Items slipped from my fingers. I'd put shirts in the bag only to find them back in the drawer minutes later. My suitcase, which I distinctly remembered storing under the bed, was nowhere to be found. "Stop it," I hissed at the walls. "I'm leaving whether you like it or not." By mid-afternoon, I'd managed to pack 2 garbage bags of clothes and a box of important documents. Everything else could stay. Dennis Burton had the right idea. Some things weren't worth dying for. I carried the bags to my car, fighting a wave of nausea as I stepped outside. The physical pull was undeniable, like elastic bands trying to snap me back into the house. I pushed through it, loading my meager belongings into the trunk. Back inside, I called my boss and explained I had a family emergency and needed to relocate immediately. He wasn't happy, but I didn't care. I'd find another job. I couldn't find another life if this house took mine. As evening approached, I realized I still had to make it through one more night. The moving company wouldn't come until Monday, but I'd be ready. Tonight, I'd follow every rule to the letter. No mistakes. I set multiple alarms on my phone, 11:55 p.m. as a warning, 12:03 a.m. for the door, 12:59 a.m. for potential roof footsteps, 1:11 a.m. for the window time. I placed a can of tuna on the counter in case the black cat appeared. The house felt different now that I'd decided to leave. Colder. Watching. The walls seemed to lean inward slightly, the ceiling a bit lower than before. Or maybe that was just my imagination, fueled by fear and lack of sleep. I sat on the edge of the couch, unwilling to risk falling asleep again. The TV remained off. I wanted to hear every sound, notice every change. The muddy footprints had dried completely now, a permanent reminder of what happened when the rules were broken. My phone chimed with a text from the moving company confirming my Monday appointment. I clutched it like a lifeline. 3 more nights. I just had to survive. 3 more nights. I looked at the framed house rules on my coffee table. Unlike Dennis Burton, I wouldn't need to pass them on to the next tenant. Let the house find some other sucker to torment. I was getting out while I still could. I spent my days packing, methodically sorting through my belongings while trying to ignore how the walls seemed to watch me. Every cardboard box I filled felt like a small victory, a declaration of independence. But even as I worked, I kept checking my phone, making sure I wouldn't miss the critical times. The house didn't like my plans. That became clearer with each passing day. I'd packed all my kitchen stuff the previous afternoon. Plates, cups, utensils, everything except a single bowl and spoon I kept for cereal. But when I walked into the kitchen that morning, the cabinet doors hung open, and every dish sat neatly stacked inside, exactly as they'd been before I'd packed them. "No," I said out loud, my voice bouncing off the empty walls. "No, that's not happening." I grabbed a garbage bag and started throwing dishes in, not bothering with the newspaper wrapping I'd used before. The crash of breaking ceramic didn't bother me. I'd leave it all behind if I had to. When my phone alarm went off at 7:30 that evening, I was taping up a box of books in the living room. Friday. The children would be coming soon. I went through my usual routine, double-checking all windows were locked, pulling curtains closed, making sure the front door was secure. Then I sat on the couch, hands pressed over my ears, trying to focus on anything but what was about to happen. The knocking started exactly on time. 3 soft taps, then a pause, then 3 more. "Please let me in," came the girl's voice, the same one I'd been hearing every Friday since I moved in. "I'm so cold out here." I kept my eyes fixed on the floor, counting the seconds in my head. "I know you're in there," she called, her voice taking on that unnatural quality that made my skin crawl. "I can smell you." New voices joined hers this time, more children, their words overlapping. "Let us play with you. We're hungry. Just open the door a little." The knocking intensified, spreading from the front door to the windows, to the back door, as if a dozen small fists were pounding all around the house. I pressed my hands harder against my ears, but it didn't help. The voices seemed to seep through the walls themselves. "You're leaving us," the first girl said, her voice suddenly right beside my ear, though I sat alone in the room. "We don't want you to go." I jumped up, spinning around, but saw nothing. The pounding continued for another 15 minutes before stopping abruptly, leaving the house in complete silence. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, a text from the moving company confirming my appointment for Monday. 3 more days. I could make it 3 more days. The black cat showed up twice the next day. The first time was in the morning. I walked into the bathroom and found it sitting on the closed toilet lid, yellow eyes watching me. I had no idea how it got in. The second time was just after dinner when I found it curled up on my bed. Each time, I followed the rule. I opened a can of tuna, set it down, and watched the cat eat. When it finished, I opened the front door and let it walk out into the night. The second time, just before midnight, the cat paused at the threshold, looking back at me with those unblinking eyes. "Go on," I said, feeling ridiculous talking to it. "I'll be gone soon, too." The cat made a low sound in its throat that wasn't quite a meow, then slipped into the darkness. Back inside, I checked my phone. 11:55. Almost time for the door. I stood by the front entrance, one hand on the deadbolt. At exactly 12:04, I felt it try to turn beneath my fingers. The metal grew hot, almost burning my palm, but I held tight, keeping it locked as the door shuddered against the frame. "Not tonight," I whispered through clenched teeth. "Not any night." After a minute, the pressure stopped. The lock cooled. I backed away slowly, keeping my eyes on the door until my next alarm went off at 12:59. Roof time. I hurried to my bedroom, climbed under the covers, and shut my eyes tight just as the first footsteps sounded above. They moved differently tonight, faster, more erratic, like someone pacing in anger. I kept my eyes closed, listening as whatever was up there moved back and forth for nearly an hour before going silent. I must have fallen asleep because the next thing I knew, my phone was blaring its 1:11 alarm. Window time. I rolled away from the window, keeping my eyes shut as the scratching began. It was louder than ever before, accompanied by those whispered voices arguing with each other. "He's leaving. We can't let him. Break it. Not allowed. Find another way." The scratching turned to a high-pitched scraping like claws digging into the glass itself. I pulled the pillow over my head, counting down the minutes until 1:18 when it would stop. When my alarm signaled the end of window time, I finally looked. In the dim light from my phone screen, I could see new scratches on the glass, deeper than before, forming what looked like words. I couldn't make them out clearly and didn't want to get closer. Whatever message they were trying to leave, I didn't want to read it. The next morning, I found my car keys missing. I'd left them on the kitchen counter right next to my wallet, but they were gone. I tore through the house, checking every surface, every pocket, even places I knew I hadn't been. After an hour of searching, I gave up and called a locksmith. The earliest they could come was tomorrow, Sunday, one day before the movers, cutting it close, but it would have to do. "We can make you a new key for your Honda," the woman on the phone said, "but you'll need to provide proof of ownership." "Not a problem," I said, rifling through my folder of important documents. "I have the title right." The folder was empty. The car title, which I'd checked just yesterday while organizing my papers, was gone. I hung up and sat at the kitchen table, trying to think. This wasn't coincidence. The house was fighting back, trying to trap me here. "It's not going to work," I said to the empty room. "I'm leaving on Monday, with or without my stuff." The lights flickered in response. I went back to packing, this time focusing on essentials, clothes, toiletries, the few personal items I couldn't bear to leave behind. I'd packed my laptop in its bag and set it by the front door, but when I went to add my charger, the bag was gone. I found it back in the bedroom, under the bed. This happened all day, items moving, disappearing, returning to their original places. By evening, I was exhausted and frustrated, but I'd managed to get most of my important things into bags by the door. As the sun set, I looked out my living room window and spotted Hayden Williams standing on his front lawn across the street. He wasn't doing anything, just standing there, staring directly at my house. When I raised my hand to wave, he didn't react. I decided to go talk to him. Maybe say goodbye, thank him for being a decent neighbor despite all the weirdness. I put on my jacket and walked across the street. "Hey, Hayden," I called as I approached. "How's it going?" Hayden turned to me with a blank expression. "Can I help you?" "It's me, Sammy, from across the street." I pointed back at my house. "I wanted to let you know I'm moving out on Monday." Hayden's face showed no recognition. "I'm sorry. Have we met before?" I laughed, thinking he was joking, but his expression remained serious. "We've talked several times," I said. "You told me about Dennis Burton, the guy who lived in my house before me, how he disappeared." Hayden took a step back. "I don't know what you're talking about. I've never spoken to you before." A chill ran up my back that had nothing to do with the evening air. "You've lived here 20 years, I said. "You were raking leaves the first time we talked. I think you have me confused with someone else." Hayden's voice was cold now, suspicious. "I've only lived here 5 years and I don't know anyone named Dennis." He turned and walked quickly back to his house, glancing over his shoulder at me once before shutting his door firmly. I stood there on the sidewalk, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Either Hayden was lying, for what reason I couldn't imagine, or something much stranger was happening. The house wasn't just moving my belongings around, it was changing reality around me. As I walked back to my house, I noticed other neighbors on the street. An older woman walking her dog crossed to the opposite sidewalk when she saw me coming. A man getting his mail looked up, made eye contact, then hurried inside. They were avoiding me. Inside, I locked the door and leaned against it, trying to calm my racing thoughts. The phone rang, making me jump. I answered without checking the caller ID. "Hello?" Silence. "Hello? Who is this?" Nothing but dead air, yet I could tell someone or something was on the line. I could hear faint breathing. "I know what you're doing," I said, though I wasn't sure who I was talking to. The house, whatever lived in it, or something else entirely. "It's not going to work. I'm leaving on Monday." The breathing on the other end grew louder, more deliberate, almost like laughter without sound. Then the line went dead. I put the phone down and checked all my alarms for the night ahead. The house rules still needed following, especially now. I couldn't afford to slip up, not when I was so close to escaping. As I sat on the couch waiting for the next critical time, my phone rang again. I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again. And again. Each time when I checked, the caller ID showed nothing. No number, no name, just blank. The electricity cut out just after 11, plunging the house into darkness. I used my phone's flashlight to find candles in the kitchen drawer. As I lit them, placing them around the living room, I felt the house watching me, waiting to see if I'd break under the pressure. 3 more nights, I said to the darkness. That's all. The candles flickered as if blown by a breeze, though the air was still. In their dancing light, the shadows on the walls seemed to move with purpose, stretching and contracting like living things. I kept my eyes on my phone, counting down the minutes until I'd need to hold the door lock again, trying not to look at what might be taking shape in the corners of my vision. The house had stopped being subtle. It knew I was leaving, and it was doing everything it could to make me stay. My departure date finally arrived. I'd spent a sleepless night on the couch with my eyes fixed on the front door, listening to every creak and groan of the house. The morning light filtering through the curtains felt like a small victory. I'd survived another night. I moved through my final day in a haze, checking and rechecking my packed bags, making sure I had my wallet, phone, and the few essentials I couldn't leave behind. The movers were coming tomorrow. Just one more night to get through. As evening approached, I felt the house watching me. The walls seemed to press inward, the ceiling hanging lower than it had yesterday. The air grew thick and stale despite the open windows. I'd been through this routine enough times now to recognize when the house was gathering its strength. Just one more night, I said out loud, my voice sounding hollow in the nearly empty living room. I set my alarms with extra care. 11:55 p.m. as a warning, 12:03 a.m. for the door, 7:25 p.m. for the Friday girl, 12:59 a.m. for the roof footsteps, and 1:11 a.m. for the window time. I placed a can of tuna on the counter just in case the cat made an appearance. The house stayed unnaturally quiet as night fell. No settling noises, no clicking of the heating system, just a heavy silence that made my ears ring. I sat on the couch, watching the minutes tick by on my phone. The waiting was always the worst part. At 7:25 p.m., my first alarm went off. I went through my security routine, checking that all windows were locked, closing every curtain, and making sure the front door was secure. I returned to the couch and put my hands over my ears, bracing myself. The knocking started at exactly 7:30 p.m. 3 soft taps, then silence, then 3 more. But this time, something was different. The knocking didn't come from just the front door. It came from every door and window simultaneously, as if the house was surrounded. "Please let me in," came the girl's voice from the front porch, the same sing-song tone I'd heard every Friday. "I'm so cold out here." But then another voice joined in from the back door. "We want to play with you." And another from the kitchen window. "Don't you want friends?" And another from the living room window. "We're so hungry." I pressed my hands harder against my ears, but the voices multiplied until it sounded like 20 different children were outside, all calling to me at once, their voices overlapping in a terrible chorus. "Don't leave us. We've been waiting for you. The house chose you. You belong here now." The pounding grew violent. The windows rattled in their frames. The front door shuddered with each impact. I curled into a ball on the couch, eyes squeezed shut, counting the seconds until 8 p.m. when I knew it would end. The voices grew more desperate as the time ticked down. "You can't leave us. We need you. Open the door." At exactly 8 p.m., everything stopped. The sudden silence was almost as shocking as the noise had been. I uncovered my ears slowly, listening for any lingering sounds. But the house was quiet again. I got up on shaky legs and peeked through a gap in the curtains. The porch was empty. The street was deserted. I collapsed back onto the couch, heart racing. They'd never been that many before, never that loud. The house was pulling out all the stops for my final night. At 10:30 p.m., I spotted movement in the kitchen. The black cat sat on the counter, yellow eyes fixed on me. I hadn't heard it come in. I never did. I got up and opened the can of tuna I'd left out, placing it on the floor. "Last meal on me," I told the cat as it jumped down and began to eat. I watched it, wondering not for the first time if it was really a cat at all. When it finished, it looked up at me and made a low sound in its throat, almost like a warning. I walked to the front door and opened it. The cat paused at the threshold, turned to look back at me one last time, then disappeared into the darkness. My 11:55 p.m. alarm buzzed. 5 minutes until the first rule. I positioned myself at the front door, hand on the deadbolt, waiting. The minutes crawled by. At exactly 12:04 a.m., I felt the metal of the deadbolt grow hot under my fingers as it tried to turn. I gripped it tighter, fighting against the invisible force. The pressure built until my knuckles turned white. Then something changed. Instead of the usual gentle resistance, the door suddenly flew toward me with such force that I was knocked backward. The door slammed against the wall with a crack that told me the drywall had broken. I scrambled to my feet and grabbed the edge of the door, using all my strength to pull it closed again. The resistance was incredible, like trying to close a door in a hurricane. When I finally managed to shut it and turn the lock, I leaned against it, breathing hard. The wall beside the door now had a doorknob-shaped hole punched through it. Plaster dust covered the floor. This was new. This was worse. I checked my phone. 12:10 a.m. I had less than an hour before the roof footsteps would start. I used the time to double-check my bags and make sure everything was ready for the morning. The moving company would arrive at 8 a.m., just 8 more hours in this place. At 12:59 a.m., my alarm went off again. I hurried to the bedroom, climbed under the covers, and closed my eyes just as the first footsteps sounded above. Tap, tap, tap. But these weren't the measured, deliberate steps I'd grown used to. These were frantic, chaotic. Multiple sets of feet ran back and forth across the roof, sometimes so hard that dust fell from the ceiling. It sounded like a crowd of people were up there, racing, pacing, jumping. The footsteps crossed directly above me, then split in different directions, then converged again. The whole house seemed to shake with their movement. I kept my eyes tightly shut, following the rule even as my heart pounded in my chest. The noise continued for what felt like hours. Just when I thought it might never end, my 1:11 a.m. alarm buzzed under my pillow. I quickly silenced it and rolled away from the window, facing the wall. The footsteps on the roof stopped abruptly. 1 minute later, at exactly 1:12 a.m., the scratching began at my bedroom window. It started as it always did, light, testing scrapes against the glass. But within seconds, it grew louder, more insistent. The scratching was joined by tapping, then pounding, then what sounded like fingernails dragging down the glass. The whispers came next, louder than ever before. "He's leaving tomorrow. We can't let him go. Break the rules. Make him look." Something hit the window with enough force to make the glass crack. I heard the sound clearly, a splintering pop followed by the tinkling of small glass pieces falling onto the sill. The whispers grew excited. "It's breaking! Just a little more. Make him look!" The urge to turn around was overwhelming. Every muscle in my body tensed with the desire to roll over and see what was making those sounds, what was trying to get in. My neck ached with the effort of keeping still. "Just a peek," a voice whispered, so close it could have been right beside my ear. "One little look won't hurt." I pressed my face into the pillow, counting the seconds. 1:18. AM couldn't come fast enough. The scratching intensified. The crack in the window spread with a sound like ice breaking on a frozen lake. Cold air seeped into the room. And then, at 1:18 a.m., Exactly. It stopped. The sudden silence was deafening. I waited another minute before rolling over to look at the window. A spiderweb of cracks spread across the glass, and through them, I could see scratch marks on the outside. Deep grooves that formed patterns that looked almost like words. I didn't try to read them. Sleep was impossible after that. I sat in the living room with all the lights on, jumping at every sound. Around 3 a.m., the house itself seemed to wake up. The walls creaked and groaned. The floorboards expanded and contracted with loud pops. The pipes in the walls rattled and banged. A picture frame fell from the wall and shattered on the floor. I hadn't even noticed it was there. I thought I'd packed all the frames. But there it was, a photo of me standing in front of this very house on the day I moved in. I didn't remember taking that picture or hanging it up. The lights in the kitchen flickered. Then the bulb burst with a pop, sending glass shards across the counter. The temperature in the house dropped rapidly. Within minutes, I could see my breath clouding in front of my face. I grabbed a blanket from my packed belongings and wrapped it around myself, huddling on the couch. The house continued its tantrum. More picture frames fell. Another light bulb exploded in the hallway. The refrigerator door swung open and slammed shut repeatedly. Just a few more hours, I whispered to myself, watching the minutes tick by on my phone. Just a few more hours, and I'm gone. The house responded with a low, angry groan that seemed to come from the foundation itself. The walls vibrated. The floor trembled. It was like being inside a living thing that was waking up, stretching, and realizing it was angry. I pulled the blanket tighter around me and counted the minutes until dawn, until the movers would arrive, until I could finally escape this place. The house protested all around me, but I stayed put, eyes fixed on my phone, watching the time crawl forward minute by agonizing minute. I woke up with a jolt as golden light streamed through my bedroom window. For a moment, I felt relief. I had made it through the night. Today was the day I'd finally escaped this house. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand. 7:15. The movers would be here in 45 minutes. I just needed to hold on a little longer. I pulled on the same clothes I'd worn yesterday, not bothering to change. My suitcase stood ready by the door, packed with the bare essentials I'd managed to keep the house from hiding. Everything else could burn for all I cared. I dragged my suitcase to the front door, took a deep breath, and stepped outside. The morning air felt clean and cool against my face. A perfect day to start over. I walked to my car, keys in hand, ready to load my suitcase. That's when I saw them. All 4 tires slashed to ribbons, the rubber hanging in shreds. Not just flat, but completely destroyed. "No," I whispered, dropping my suitcase. "No, no, no." I circled the car, running my fingers over the jagged cuts in each tire. These weren't random punctures. The slices were methodical, deliberate, long, curved gashes that reminded me of claw marks. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and called for a taxi. The dispatcher promised one would arrive in 15 minutes. I thanked her, ended the call, and sat on the front steps to wait, keeping my suitcase close. 15 minutes passed. No taxi. 20 minutes. Nothing. 30 minutes. The street remained empty. I called the taxi company again. The dispatcher sounded confused. "Sir, we sent a car 20 minutes ago. The driver reported no one was at the address. That's impossible. I've been sitting outside the whole time. I'm sorry, sir. Would you like me to send another car?" "Yes, please." I gave her the address again and hung up. The movers would be arriving soon. I could wait for them instead. But what if they never showed up either? What if the house somehow made them drive right past, not seeing the house at all? I couldn't take that chance. I needed to get away now. I grabbed my suitcase and started walking down the driveway toward the street. I made it halfway when the feeling hit me. A wave of dread so powerful it made me stagger. My stomach turned over, acid rising in my throat. My head spun, vision blurring at the edges. Another step forward and the nausea intensified. 2 more steps and my legs began to shake. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. I took 1 more determined step and the invisible force yanked me backward like a fish on a hook. My feet moved against my will, carrying me back toward the house. I fought against it, digging my heels into the gravel, but it was like trying to resist a powerful current. My body wasn't my own anymore. I stumbled backward until I was at the front door again. The moment I crossed the threshold, the symptoms eased. The nausea faded. My vision cleared. My heart rate slowed. The house had me on a leash. I sat on the floor just inside the doorway, catching my breath. This was why Dennis Burton had left everything behind. His furniture, his clothes, even his car in the garage. The house wouldn't let him take anything. Maybe it wouldn't let him leave at all unless he broke free completely. I thought about Amanda from the library, about what she'd told me regarding Dennis. He'd disappeared suddenly, without packing, without telling anyone. Now I understood why. It wasn't a choice. It was the only way. I stood up, leaving my suitcase on the floor. I emptied my pockets, placing my wallet and phone on the small table by the door. I'd need money and my ID, nothing else. I could replace everything. I took the cash and cards from my wallet, stuffing them into my jeans pocket along with my driver's license. I left the wallet itself behind. I walked to the door again, took a deep breath, and stepped outside. This time I didn't bother with the driveway. I cut across the lawn, heading straight for the property line where my yard met the street. With each step, the resistance grew stronger. The invisible tether pulled at me. The nausea returned. The dread built in my chest. My vision tunneled, darkness creeping in from the edges. My legs felt heavier with each step, like I was walking through wet cement. 10 feet from the street, I couldn't breathe. My lungs refused to expand. My heart beat so erratically I thought it might stop. The pull became physical. I could feel it in the center of my chest, like hooks in my ribs dragging me backward. I fell to my knees, gasping for air. The house was winning. No, I wouldn't let it. I wouldn't become another Eli Lucas or Warren Ortega. I wouldn't disappear like Dennis Burton. I forced myself up on trembling legs and took another step forward. Then another. The pain was blinding now, white hot in my chest and skull. My ears rang, blood trickled from my nose. 1 more step. I reached the very edge of the property where my lawn met the sidewalk. The boundary. I could feel it like a physical barrier pressing against me. I closed my eyes and thought about the rules. The locked door at 12:04, the girl on Fridays, the footsteps on the roof, the scratching at the windows, the black cat with knowing eyes. All those rules, all those rituals, they weren't protection. They were chains, each one a link binding me tighter to the house. I took a deep breath and pushed forward with everything I had. Something snapped. I felt it tear inside me, a physical breaking, like a cord stretched too tight finally giving way. The pain was intense but brief, a burning sensation in my chest that flared and then vanished. I staggered forward, suddenly free. The resistance was gone. The nausea disappeared. I could breathe again. I'd broken through. I didn't stop to think. I ran. Down the sidewalk, away from the property, not daring to look back. My feet pounded against the concrete as I sprinted, putting as much distance between myself and that house as possible. Behind me, I heard it, a high, piercing sound that started as a wail and rose to a scream. A woman's voice, filled with fury and loss. It echoed down the street, making the hair on my arms stand up. The house was angry. I ran faster, turning the corner at the end of the street. The screaming faded but didn't stop completely. I kept running until my lungs burned and my legs ached, until I was several blocks away. A car approached, slowing as it neared me. I stepped into the road, waving my arms frantically. The car stopped, and the driver, a middle-aged woman with concerned eyes, rolled down her window. "Are you okay?" she asked, taking in my disheveled appearance, the blood dried under my nose. "Please," I said, my voice hoarse. "I need to get to the bus station. Can you give me a ride?" She hesitated only a moment before nodding. "Get in." I climbed into the passenger seat, hands still shaking. As we pulled away, I finally allowed myself a single glance back in the direction of Oakwood Drive. "Thank you," I whispered. Not to the driver, but to whatever luck or fate had allowed me to escape. I sat on the bus leaving Bend, watching the Oregon landscape roll past my window. Trees and hills blurred into a green-brown smudge as we picked up speed on the highway. I'd managed to buy a ticket with the cash in my pocket, not caring where the bus was headed as long as it took me away from that house. My chest still hurt where something had snapped inside me at the property line. I rubbed at the spot, feeling a phantom ache like a cut cord. The further we drove, the clearer my head became. It was like waking up from a dream that had seemed completely normal while I was in it, but now made no sense at all. I looked down at my hands. They'd finally stopped shaking. All I had were the clothes on my back, my driver's license, and the credit cards I'd stuffed in my jeans pocket. My wallet, phone, clothes, laptop, everything else was still sitting in that house on Oakwood Drive. An older woman across the aisle caught me staring at my empty hands. "You okay, honey?" she asked. I nodded. "Yeah, just had to leave in a hurry." She gave me a sympathetic smile. Sometimes that's the only way to go. She had no idea how right she was. The bus rumbled on, and I watched the mile markers tick by. With each one, I felt the mental fog lifting more. It was getting easier to think straight, to remember things clearly. The house had been in my head, working its way deeper every day I stayed there. Not just making me follow its rules, but making me want to stay. Making it hard to even think about leaving. I thought about Dennis Burton, the previous tenant. He'd figured out the rules, just like I had. He'd lasted 11 months. Had he felt this same strange mixture of relief and loss after escaping? Had he also left everything behind? The bus pulled into a rest stop around noon. The driver announced we had 30 minutes. I stepped out, stretching my legs and breathing in air that felt clean and normal. No pressure in my chest, no invisible hooks pulling me back toward Bend. Inside the rest stop, I spotted a row of public computers. I walked over and sat down at one. The browser opened to a search page, and I typed in my former address, 42 Oakwood Drive, Bend, Oregon. I found more than I expected. News articles going back decades, missing persons reports, obituaries, death notices, police bulletins. Over 50 years, more than a dozen people had either died in that house or simply vanished. The pattern was there if you knew what to look for. Not every owner or tenant. The house seemed to pick and choose. Some people lived there without incident for years. Others lasted only months before turning up dead or disappearing completely. I clicked through old newspaper archives, finding stories about Warren Ortega, Luna Castillo, and Eli Lucas, the 3 deaths Amanda had shown me at the library. But there were others I hadn't known about. A family in the 70s whose 8-year-old daughter vanished from her bedroom. A retired couple in the 80s. The husband found dead in the kitchen with unexplained wounds, the wife never found. A college student in the 90s who stopped attending classes, then stopped answering his door, then was found hanging from the living room ceiling fan. The house selected certain people. Then it trapped them with its rules. I leaned back in the hard plastic chair, running my hands through my hair. The rules, they weren't protection. Not really. They were just a way to keep you alive longer, to keep you in the house, to prepare you for something worse. Because the longer I stayed, the more the house got into my head, the harder it became to leave. If I had stayed much longer, would I have even wanted to escape anymore? Would I have become like the others who died there, so trapped by the house's influence that death was the only way out? A chilling thought hit me. The house would find someone else. The property would go back on the market, probably at a suspiciously low price, just like when I bought it. Some other person would be attracted to the bargain, just like I was. The house would wait patiently, and the rules would remain hidden in the kitchen cabinet, waiting to either save or condemn whoever discovered them. The bus driver called for passengers to reboard. I stood up, my legs feeling heavy. I'd escaped, but others wouldn't. I thought about calling the police, but what would I tell them? That a house was alive and trapping people with supernatural rules? They'd think I was crazy. I walked back to the bus and found my seat by the window. As we pulled away from the rest stop, I pressed my forehead against the cool glass. The distance between me and Bend grew with every mile, but the knowledge of what lurked there would follow me forever. The rules were still there, waiting. The house was still there, hungry. And sooner or later, someone new would move in, find that folded paper, and have to make the same choices I did. I closed my eyes as the bus drove on, carrying me toward whatever came next.